I'm Julian Oliver. I'm from New Zealand. Traditionally I've been known as a media artist. I'm referring to myself more these days as a kind of critical engineer. I pretty much live off exhibitions, commissions and workshops. I give a lot of talks, but yeah, I'm an independent developer and maker. What is the connection between my own subjects and interests and the theme of Island CQ? Well, I'm very interested in this idea of control as something that is not necessarily transparently expressed within a verbalized politic, you know, but that's something that can actually creep in on the level of infrastructure, on the level of that which we depend upon in order to have the life that we currently cherish. And so on this topic, I think much of the time it's about identifying not who's controlling us, but how we are controlled, and maybe a control doesn't even come down to a single interest. Maybe it can be multiple interests. Maybe actually we are only controlled by virtue of the fact that we don't know how we are being controlled, or even whether we are at all. And so what I like about this, about Island CQ, is it's about getting down to the methods and strategies and tactics and techniques for identifying the superstructure, the substrate upon which contemporary life is built, and asking rigorous questions that may not have a more traditional humanities direction, but actually look at building real strategies for addressing these problems, building real tools. How did I manage to transfer this knowledge to the participants of Island CQ? Well, what we did, at least in the workshop part, was to look at real tools and techniques for identifying that mass field of machines, that network of networks called the internet. Actually, really seeing it on a skeletal level and understanding how control might be implemented, even quite silently in the background of this network of networks, and looking at how we could even control, or at least surveil, others on computer networks, and manipulate other machines on computer networks, and therefore learn a lot about alter content, therefore change meaning, but also change the relationship that other people have with that network. In the course of the talk, it was a more direct engagement with some of these topics, looking at things like cloud computing as a kind of a modern myth that keeps a lot of awareness as to how these structures of control, these systems of control, might actually be in place. What did we practically do in the masterclass? Well, what we got down to in the masterclass was initially looking at the command line as both a metaphor and an appropriate toolkit for getting down to the skeletal level of computer networks. And by metaphor, I mean that we're sort of scraping back all of the layers and layers of pictures and the whole symbolic domain, and getting down to the terms on which the actual network is deployed and managed. Mm-hmm. The command line is very suitable for this. And then we started looking into how we can find other computers on networks, how we can find out about a person once we have sufficient information about those computers on the networks, and then looking at how we can manipulate them, the person or the machine itself, or both. How can we protect ourselves better on computer networks? Well, one of the ways most certainly is to use SSL, secure socket layer connections, wherever possible. So if you are doing things, for instance, on social networking context, or banking, or whatever, any point in which you're moving, which you're needing to connect with a site securely such that you don't want it to be hijacked, then you most certainly want to be using this. And this presents itself is usually in browsers as a little padlock in the corner where the URL bar itself will change colour. I thoroughly recommend using virtual private networks. There are several free services out there. This makes an encrypted tunnel between you and their service, such that any of your traffic going along that tunnel cannot be read by third parties, by men in the middle, as the term goes. And then finally, I would just look at more and more ways to avoid using computer networks where human-to-human, face-to-face communication would otherwise suffice. You can also just diversify. You can have multiple different users for different uses of computer networks. And just don't give too much to those gigantic data centers buried underground, surrounded by guns, dirt and tax and lawyers and shareholders. Just realize that your data is actually on geopoliticized territory. It's somewhere. It's in someone's private property. Doesn't necessarily entirely belong to you as such. And even if it does belong to you, it is very much there to be used, to be read by those that actually own that hardware, hardware that your stuff is on. I'm very happy to be in a context where I feel that people aren't afraid to ask these questions and also look at some of the answers. I think it's a very brave and open-minded bunch of people here. I think the context also does a little bit in that favour, given the fact that we're actually quite away from that infrastructure. We're physically away from it enough to be able to develop some subjectivity, some techno-political subjectivity toward it. I think it's a very smart thing to have an event like this away from the city.
Some distance.
Yes, it's really great.